Rabbi Lapin, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program. So South Africa is going through an interesting time. State capture has become the word. And when I look at it, the state does not capture itself. It has to be captured by an entity. And in this case, it looks as if business in its various forms has been the capturer. And so that got me thinking, had there been ethical leadership as far back as 1994, might we have had state capture averted? We'll get to that answer towards the end of this conversation. But let's start at the beginning and say, well, what is ethical leadership? Is it not just doing the right thing?
I think it is, but I think doing the right thing is a little bit risky in defining it that way because it's just too broad. I think a lot of despots in history have done terrible things, actually believing that it's the right thing to do under those circumstances. So I think it's a little bit shaky to do that. Let's first think what ethical leadership is not. To me, it is not about compliance. If we're talking about regulation and compliance, that's not ethics, that's law. So if you want to make bribery illegal, that's great, and that's a law, and you prosecute for it, but that's no longer ethics. Ethics is the way you behave beyond the law, where there isn't a law and a regulation to regulate you. You're self-regulated because of an internal compass. I think ethical leadership, when we did the work on the King Commission's Code of Ethics initially here in South Africa, the way we approached it was the bottom line of ethics, the most fundamental foundation of ethics is just not harming other people. Let's not even get onto philanthropy and doing good things for people, and just on the most basic level, if you can just run a business without harming anybody, that's pretty good. So we took each of the stakeholders and said, how could each stakeholder potentially be harmed by business? And what should be done to protect the stakeholder from business harming them? So when you talk about ethical leadership at the lowest level, I consider it being careful not to harm your stakeholders, making managerial decisions and taking actions that don't damage other people. Taking it a level higher, and the way we talk about it in the United States now, is much more around being a values-based leader, a leader that makes values-based decisions, a leader that believes that there's a cause higher than themselves or other than themselves, that business is in service of another, be that the customer or society or the shareholder. I'm here to serve. That's what business is.
So some people might say that, this whole thing about ethical products and so on and so forth is a new age thing, and that, we're just kind of following a fad, and that maybe there'll be something else in the future. How did businesses survive before ethical leadership, and does it really make a difference to business if you are ethical?
So that's interesting. I'm sure you're right, that this ethics thing is also a bit of a fad and a branding, and people are getting onto the bandwagon, and that will come and go. Ethical products, there's no such thing as an ethical product. They're ethical people who make good products. Products aren't ethical or unethical. The people are. I used to argue that even there's no such thing as an ethical corporation. Corporation is a legal entity. It's a piece of paper. There are ethical leaders of corporations. There are ethical people, not ethical corporations. So I think when you look at ethics as the way people conduct themselves, the way they make decisions, then it becomes a little different. And I must tell you, at the start of my work, we go back 25, 30 years ago in South Africa, the quality of ethical leadership in business was high. Certainly among the people I dealt with, and I dealt with a very wide spectrum of leaders from every cultural and ethnic group. And there was a strong sense of wanting to do the right thing and knowing what the right thing is. What's interesting to me is how it degenerated. Whereas in the United States, I'm witnessing a much greater evolution of ethical awareness and the idea and understanding of values-based leadership. In South Africa, with everything that's gone on over the past decade or so, I think we're seeing a deterioration.
What do you think causes that deterioration? How do we start losing that ethical part of ourselves?
So Peter, I think that one of the problems is before we even get to ethics, when law isn't respected, ethics doesn't even start.
Okay.
And if we're living in a society where law is ignored and almost scoffed at, then we can't even begin a discussion about ethics. I took my family on a visit to the Kruger Park last week. It was amazing. It was just spectacular. But on the road, we watched the taxi drivers ignore the law, and everybody else standing by and doing nothing. Nobody hooted, nobody did anything. Just let them do it. You know, in an environment like that, you start saying to yourself, so what about me? Do I just sit here and let everybody else take advantage? We've got to get the law right and simultaneously build ethical awareness.
So we're going to start moving into this area of culture. And I just wonder, I mean, I spent some time in the UK, and people would leave parcels on my front door, and I know that whatever time I came, it would be there. I couldn't do that here in South Africa. So I wonder if the behavior of business often isn't just a representation of society at large.
I think that's true, but I think we must also not let business get off that easily, because I think business can influence society at large. So I think there are a whole lot of knock-on effects, and you're quite right. In the United States as well, Amazon delivers parcels to the outside door, and it's there when I come home. It's those aren't things. People leave their garden furniture outside. There are no fences. People don't steal. Now, a lot of that is respect for the law, because you get caught. In America, if you break the law, you get caught, and you get prosecuted, and you go to jail. And everybody knows that. So the law is kind of in place. Yes, you've always got the people who'll divert the law, but generally the law is in place, the legal system is in place. And then ethics becomes much greater. And I think business leaders have played a part there and could play a part here in creating a much higher awareness of ethics and values in business. And I think initiatives such as what Columba Leadership is doing, the very conversation we're having with Henley Business School, I mean, these are all examples of where business leadership can partner government and educational institutions to create a much higher awareness.
Is there a correlation between culture and ethical leadership?
Totally, isn't there? I mean, it must be, because ethical leadership really only works when it's built into the DNA of an organization. If I have to consult my code of ethics to know whether I'm allowed to or not allowed to do it, it's failing. Ethics and culture, it's a little bit like a window pane. You know, if it's clean, you don't notice it. And if the ethics are clean, you don't see them. It's just the way we do things. So ethics and values need to be built into the culture of the organization, into its thinking, into its processes, into the way it operates.
How do you get people to buy into it? You've got 3,000, 4,000 employees. You come into this organization, and you're saying that I need to lead ethically, and you're trying to create this culture. How does that filter down to the guy who sweeps, so that, you know, even the way he does his job, he's thinking, I've got to do a little bit more than what I'm required?
So it's really interesting. In the beginning, when I started in this work, it was really hard. It was hard to convince leaders that there's value in this. Now we have a track record, and we have data to demonstrate the performance outcomes of companies that are values-based and that are purpose-driven. So it's easier now to persuade leadership to invest effort and time into this. The interesting thing is, as you get lower in the organization, there's usually a sense of relief. Oh my goodness, at last they get it. It's not and I'm happy to be part of it, and I want to be part of it. And I realize my work is now more important, and I'm also in service, even if I'm just sweeping the floor. I'm in service to other people. I'm in service to community. I'm in service to something bigger than me. And we find people so appreciated. It's like a breath of fresh air for them, that their natural sense of right and of goodness just comes out. And the growth in their productivity is so beautiful and phenomenal to see.
Business by its nature is very competitive, and some would even say cutthroat. How does a nice guy able to compete in an environment like that?
So it's for that very reason, because the question you're asking, which is so key to the whole discussion, is that we in my consulting firm, we focus on what we call strategy and leadership. And our best and most value-adding work is when our clients use our methodology both in their strategic thinking and in their leadership. Because you're absolutely right. If you develop leadership that is nice and they understand, and then you get very soft, and the organization gets very soft, and you lose competitive edge. And if you go crazy on the competitive side and you become cutthroat, then you lose the values. The real key is managing that polarity, between strategic, we call it distinction, how to distinguish yourself, not competitive advantage, because that's when you're really focused on the competitor. We talk about strategic distinction. How do you distinguish yourself as a business, and how do you develop leaders that can deliver on that distinction?
All right, so King is about governance. How did ethics get into that equation? And because governance is all compliance, I would have thought. So how does the ethics story get in there?
And bear in mind that the King Commission, which was very pioneering and quite revolutionary at its time, it was before a lot of the collapses, the ethical collapses in the United States and elsewhere. There was a realization by the Chamber of Commerce at the time, the Institute of Directors that were behind it, and certainly Mervyn King himself, that we need the governance, but the governance needs to be underpinned by a belief system. Mm-hmm. What do we believe is right and wrong? This is not just about another set of regulations and law. So what Mervyn King asked us to do was help develop that underpinning system of values that will permeate the governance. And it was quite a remarkable piece of work, the whole first King Commission and its subsequent iterations.
All right, so again, leadership, and you've written this book, Led by Greatness. You hear often about what good leadership is about, and it's not about fear, it's more about inspiring. How do you become inspiring? What is it? What are those qualities that people look at and say, I want to work for this person?
So that's interesting, and we before I wrote Lead by Greatness, I interviewed about 50 CEOs of private companies, and we looked at particularly very fast-growing private companies. So I wanted to look at companies where the growth was not a function of the market or anything else artificial, but just of the internal. We really questioned them to understand what they attribute their success to and their growth, and from that and the various different sources of learning, some ancient and some modern that I was looking at, we developed three primary areas that you need. If I'm not going to be inspired by somebody, firstly, who's not inspirational. So what does that mean? Inspirational means that it doesn't mean charismatic. Because if you think about your own life and the people who inspired you, I bet some of them were not the most charismatic. They were just, could be a grandmother, a teacher, just surprising people sometimes. So it's not about charisma. What is it about? And I believe it's about, number one, authenticity. You're not inspired by somebody you think is a fake. You've got to be able to feel from inside this is a real human being. The second is they have a sense of purpose. They're working for something bigger than just their own interests. They're working for your interests and beyond your interests. And the third one is self-mastery. They can regulate themselves. They don't lose it at every moment. They're in control of themselves. Those three elements create an inspiring leader. The book goes on with some other qualities that to really follow somebody, you need to trust them. And so we started looking at, so what are the levers of trust? How do you develop, because trust is not about reliability. It's not just because you do what you say you'll do. That's reliability. Trust is a deep belief in you, and how do I develop that? And we've figured I don't trust people who are arrogant, so humility becomes important. I don't trust people who are invulnerable, who've always got the answer to everything and everything's worked out perfectly. You don't trust those people. You trust the person who's thinking it through with you, who's asking questions, who's seeking to understand. So vulnerability, being able to say, I don't know the answer, let's work this out. And the third one is generosity. You want people to be generous. And then finally, the last part of the book is really about wisdom. Self-awareness, being wise about yourself, being wise about how others experience you, the different cultural filters in the world, how people see and experience the world, and being able to align your own intuitive wisdom with empirical evidence.
All right, as we start to wrap up this conversation, I'm going to take you back where we started. And given what you've shared, if we had this ethical leadership in play from 94 and just cemented it more and more over time, might state capture not have happened?
It's such an important question, and I don't know the answer to it, but if we think some of it through, firstly, I think state capture, you're right when you say a state can't capture itself, but a state has to allow itself to be captured. If a state is not putting up resistance to the attempts at capturing it, the same as militarily, if somebody's going to capture your country, but you're going to put up some resistance. So I think, yes, while business is opportunistic, and in business you'll always find the pirates who will take every opportunity, no matter how ethical or unethical, and they'll hone in on an opportunity, even if it's unethical. It might not have happened if government was not inviting capture. So I think it was a partnership of government and business.
All right. A little bit earlier on, you said that business has a role to play in influencing society. How do we move forward? How do we take these lessons and thoughts that you've gathered over time to set South Africa back on the course that it should be on?
So Peter, I've always called business a university of greatness, and I think I mention it in the book in Lead by Greatness. It's a place where you can learn to become great. But businesses need to understand they are educational institutions, apart from everything else. Not only should they partner educational institutions, they are educational institutions. People spend a lot of their life at work in businesses, and they model their lives around the role models they see in business. And I'm finding those businesses who are willing to invest in the education of their executives and employee, their moral education, because the churches aren't doing that, the family systems aren't doing that anymore. So where are people getting a sense of right and wrong? Business can do that, and the more we find businesses developing their own value system and teaching that value system, and teaching the importance of right and wrong, their ability to project that outwards from beyond themselves is massive.
Rabbi David Lapin, thanks so much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jen Sue, and you're watching Joburg Today.